Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. You are listening to The Account with a news update for day 358 on the war in Ukraine. Today, we start with news about the latest Russian missile attack on Ukraine. Else, I only have minor updates, and I group them into the usual situation inside Ukraine, with an update on the results of the Ramstein-style meeting and a visit by the Israeli foreign minister, the occupied territories, Russia and Belarus, including reports of a meeting between Putin and Lukashenko, and the international developments. But to start the report, a look at the flashpoints along the front. Crimea. Not a whole lot to report from here today. It seems Russia managed to advance slightly around Dibrova. Russia also reported they shelled Ukrainian positions around Dibrova and Kuzmine. Bakhmut. This part of the front was rather quiet today as well. Ukraine reported repelled attacks around the city. Ukrainian soldiers were ordered to take up positions west of the river running through the settlement, marked here with a red line. South of Bakhmut, it seems Ukraine managed to push Russian soldiers back ever so slightly. The U.S. Deputy Secretary of State for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, described the Russian offensive in the east, and especially Bakhmut, as very pathetic. Vuhledar. Generally, the situation has not changed. Russia is still trying to advance around Vuhledar without any success. I will be showing a video now that was geolocated to this area. Russia released this video today showing a TOS-1A strike on Ukrainian positions south of Vuhledar. Russian sources earlier claimed that the southern Dacha was under Russian control. However, as this footage was taken almost on the edge of the Kashiach River, this is evidence that Russia either had to fall back or never controlled the area. To start the news segment, we will take a look at the latest Russian missile attack on Ukraine. Russia fired a total of 36 air and sea-launched cruise missiles on the night of February 15th to 16th, with Ukrainian air defense shooting down 16 of them. Russia hit targets in the north and west of Ukraine, as well as in Dnipropetrovsk, Moldova, and Kirovohrad oblasts with drones and missiles overnight. According to Serhiy Lysak, head of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Military Administration, 1 civilian was killed and 7 injured in Pavlograd. Ukrainian reported that the damage caused by the missile strike would not lead to any blackouts this time. The Ukrainian CEO further stated that he believes the worst Russian missile attacks on the energy grid are likely over due to the dwindling stock of Russian missiles and Ukraine's improved air defenses. The advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Mikhailo Podolyak, claimed that no critical hits were reported after the missile attack. However, Maxim Kozitsky, head of Lviv Oblast Military Administration, reported a hit on critical infrastructure in Lviv. I am not sure what exactly the difference here is, but my guess is Podolyak referred to the fact that there will be no emergency blackouts throughout Ukraine this time. And now, the minor news out of Ukraine. Today, the 9th Ramstein-style meeting concluded. Oleksiy Reznikov, defense minister of Ukraine, wrote on Facebook that, among other things, the armored fist of Ukraine is being strengthened, which will allow the execution of the plans laid out by Valery Zaluzhny, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine. 100 Ukrainian soldiers and 1 Ukrainian civilian were exchanged today for 101 Russian soldiers in the latest prisoner swap between Ukraine and Russia. President Volodymyr Zelensky said in an interview that he believes that the predicted large-scale spring offensive of the Russian Federation has already begun, but Ukraine will be able to resist it. The Israeli Foreign Minister Eli Cohen has arrived in Kyiv for an official visit. During his meeting with President Zelensky, he said Israel would provide Ukraine with an air threat warning system for civilians in 3 to 6 months and would support Zelensky's peace plan at the UN. Oleksiy Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, said in an interview that he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin will try again to push Belarusian President Lukashenko into participating in the war in Ukraine. He further stated that Russia is preparing for a major missile attack on February 23rd to 24th to mark the anniversary of the invasion of Ukraine. According to Danilov, a Ukrainian victory in the war will lead to the collapse of the Russian Federation, drawing parallels to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Lastly, Oleksiy Danilov said in another interview that the Kremlin is hatching a plan B after the failure to capture all of Ukraine under the guidance of Viktor Medvedchuk. Medvedchuk is a pro-Russian Ukrainian politician whose daughter's godfather is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. According to the Telegram channel Crimean Wind, an explosion rang out in Amiansk, Crimea. The explosion heard was reportedly not caused by air defense. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. According to the representative of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Mykola Danilov, Russia is trying to modernize its Kh-101 cruise missiles in order to turn them into more lethal and accurate weapons. This assessment is based on analyzed debris from various missiles. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko will meet to discuss military cooperation between the countries. The meeting will take place tomorrow at Putin's residence in Novo-Ogaryovo near Moscow. Lukashenko also has invited US President Joe Biden to Minsk to meet with Vladimir Putin and discuss how to end the war against Ukraine. He further stated that the Belarusian army will join the Russian armed forces only in the event of an attack on Belarus. In St. Petersburg, Russia, 58-year-old Marina Yankina, who headed the financial support department of the Russian Defense Ministry in the Western Military District, was found dead. Vladislav Surkov, former first deputy head of the Russian presidential administration, has said that he worked on the Minsk agreements based on the idea that they should never be fulfilled. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. As Russia begins a new offensive in eastern Ukraine, the US and its allies are skeptical Moscow has amassed the manpower and resources to make significant gains, US, UK, and Ukrainian officials say. During the Forum on Security Cooperation in Vienna, the British delegation said that Russia has suffered its biggest losses of the war in just 2 weeks, and Russian President Vladimir Putin has limited space to maneuver. The EU delegation, meanwhile, said Russia is ignoring losses to desperately try to achieve any sort of progress ahead of the war's anniversary. Estonia has proposed that EU countries are to invest roughly 4 billion euros to jointly procure the 1 million rounds of ammunition that Ukraine needs this year to repel the Russian invasion. United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken allegedly said during a telephone conversation with a group of experts on Zoom that the White House does not encourage Ukraine to take back the Russian-occupied Crimea, as it is a red line for Moscow, but the decision is only up to Kyiv. The US Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs, Karen Donfried, said in an interview that the US is worried about reports of a Russian plot to overthrow power in Moldova. A large majority in the Storting, Norway's parliament, has reached an agreement on a multi-year support program for Ukraine worth 75 billion Norwegian kroner, almost 7 billion euros. The National Council of the Slovak Republic has once again condemned Russian aggression in Ukraine and expressed its support for independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Ukraine. At the same time, the National Assembly declared the Russian government as a terrorist regime and Russia as a state sponsor for terrorism. The European Parliament has urged EU member states to consider supplying Ukraine with fighter jets, helicopters, missile systems, and more ammunition. And now for the Intelligence Report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. The Russian Aerospace Forces, VKS, continue to deploy a similar number of aircraft in support of the Ukraine operation as they have for many months. Russian sortie rates have increased over the last week, following several weeks of quieter activity. Air activity is now roughly in line with the average daily rate seen since summer 2022. Overall, Russian air power continues to significantly underperform in the war, constrained by a continued high threat from Ukrainian air defenses and dispersed basing due to the threat of strikes against Russian airfields. Russian combat jets operate almost exclusively over Russian-held territory, preventing them from carrying out their key strike role effectively. Across Russia, the VKS likely maintains a large intact fleet of approximately 1,500 crewed military aircraft, despite losing over 130 since the start of the invasion. However, it is unlikely that the VKS is currently preparing for a dramatically expanded air campaign, as under the current battlefield circumstances it would likely suffer unsustainable aircraft losses. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Russian President Vladimir Putin is unlikely to announce measures for further escalation of the war in Ukraine, major new Russian mobilization initiatives, or any other significant policy in his planned address to the Russian Federal Assembly on February 21st. The Institute further wrote that Russia is incapable of quickly repairing its military hardware that sustained damage in the war zone. Meanwhile, the timely Western provisions of tanks and armored vehicles to Ukraine would further offset Russia's ability to conduct mechanized warfare, as Russia struggles to restart its defense production in the immediate term, the analysts stress. Ukraine likely will continue to have a window of opportunity to conduct large-scale counter-offensives over the next month, should Western aid arrive in a timely manner. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. During the day, the enemy launched another missile attack on the territory of our country. 16 out of 36 enemy missiles were shot down by our defenders. The enemy still does not give up his invasion plans despite significant losses. The main efforts are concentrated on conducting offensive actions in the Kupiansk, Liman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Shakhtarsk directions. The occupying administration of the city of Hola Prista in Kherson Oblast is putting pressure on the local population to reissue property rights according to Russian legislation. In particular, information is spreading that Ukrainian citizens who do not comply with the demands of the occupiers by May this year will be deported to Russia. In Mariupol, temporarily occupied by the enemy, the Russian invaders are carrying out measures to mobilize certain representatives of society. From now on, the homeless, as well as people with alcohol or drug addiction, are taken to the enemy's army. And that concludes today's news report. If you're interested in any of the articles, you can find links to them in the description. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.